So I will leave. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey and we are about to get very, very nerdy with my favorite books of 2020. That's right, we have reached the end of the year video where I talk about all of my favorite books of the entire year of 2020. So I'm actually going to count down for my top 15. I was going to do 10 and then I realized that I had 10 and a few honorable mentions, which basically was just my top 15. So I decided to just go ahead and do my top 15. So that is what we are going to do today. This is the very last video of 2020, which is crazy to think about. But this felt like the appropriate one to leave until the very end. So that's what I did. So I will leave a playlist down below to all of my wrap-ups so you can see my in-depth thoughts on all of these. I'm going to try to not go into too much detail because we'll be here forever. But this is just a gigantic gush of a video talking about some of my favorites. So let me know down below if you can guess what my number 1, or at least within my number 3 is, because I've talked about a lot of these books a lot, and I would not be surprised if some of you guys were correct and correctly guessed it. But let's just get right into it. I love doing this video, it's so much fun. Coming in spot number 15 is Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore. This is a adult romance book that's set around the suffragette movement, and I freaking love this book. I read this book back in February. I was doing a romance month. This one is one that I didn't really know what to expect going into it. It sounded really interesting. I heard Haley from Haley and Bookland talk about it, which is what brought my attention to it. This just gave me all the fun feelings. I read this within a couple of days. I loved it so much. I love this writer because this is her debut novel, but it doesn't feel like a debut novel. It feels like she's been writing for years, and I'm excited to continue with more stuff from her. But this is just perfect. I mean, guys, it's England. It's like Victorian England. And it's a romance. Totally my thing. It was great. So great. Coming in number 14 is another one that I've talked quite a lot about, and that is Roaring by Lindsay Duga. Are we surprised that this is on this list at all? Because we definitely shouldn't be. This is a fun fantasy revolving around mythical creatures, specifically a siren in this book, and a kind of guy who works for not the FBI, but the FBI equivalent, that has to do and deal with magical creatures, and it's the two of them and an adventure that sparks between the two of them. It's a romance. It's glorious. I loved the creativity the author took in creating this world. I think the explanation of how these mythical creatures were created is fascinating. It's very kind of science-based, and it just gave it a very logical look to a fantasy world, which I really appreciated, and I loved this book so much. I've raved about this book so many times on this channel. I got an ARC of this book from NetGalley and then loved it so much that I had to get my own copy. It was fabulous. It's an indie published book, and I highly recommend you check it out if you are interested in mythical creatures and sirens and a kind of magic system or mythical world that has to do a little bit more logical and a little bit more with science. Coming in at number 13 is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is just a glorious book. I'd never read anything by Elizabeth Acevedo until this year, and I've read all of her books now. And this was the first one that I picked up. It is written in verse, and it is amazing. I love Elizabeth Acevedo's writing style. It's very lyrical, which makes sense for a book that is written in verse. This is a very tough subject to talk about. It follows two girls who are actually sisters. One lives in the Dominican and one lives in New York, and they do not know each other, but their father dies in a plane crash at the beginning of this book. And then they find out about each other and find out they are half-sisters, and it's about grief, and it's about the two of them getting to know each other and like getting comfort in their grief together. It was beautifully written. I love Elizabeth Acevedo's writing style. It's very poetic in her verse writing, but when you read her other books and even her author's notes, it is just the way that she writes, and I love it. I love it so much. She sees the world a very different way, and she is now one of my auto-buy authors, and I want to just see all of the amazing things that she has to offer in the future. Coming in at number 12 is a book that I do not own, sadly, but I want to, and that is Girl Made of Stars by Ashley Herring Blake. I read this in March, and I flew through it within 2 days. This is a very tough situation and a very tough book to read because it does revolve around the subject of rape, which is not a story that I usually have really ever read before, but I loved the simplicity of the writing style, so that even though this is a very tough subject to get through, it is written in a way that is very easy to digest, which I really appreciated. I loved that so much. And it is from the perspective of someone who is not one of the two parties involved. What I mean by that is our main character is the sister of the guy involved who has been accused of rape, and I believe that they are twins, and he never lies to her. And then the girl involved is actually his girlfriend, but is a very close friend of our main character. So she is in the middle of this situation, and it's very tough on her because she wants to stand by her brother, but she also really believes her friend and thinks her brother could have possibly done this. So it's a tough situation to be in, but it was a very unique perspective to be in, which I really appreciated. There's a lot of rep within this book, which I had no idea going into, and I loved. And it's just a very tough story, but a very well-written story in a way that is easy to comprehend. Coming in at number 11 is I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver. This is, I loved this story so much. If you like stories that are written by Meredith Russo and have to do with a main character who is transgender or non-binary, I think that this is the book for you. It follows our main character who is non-binary, and at the very beginning of the story comes out as non-binary to their parents, and their parents are very much not accepting of it and basically kick them out of the house. And they kind of squat with their sister, and their sister is trying really hard to be there for them, help them through this tough time, be a home for them, even though they haven't been in great contact lately. And I think this definitely covers a wide range of tough topics. It definitely covers a lot of rep within this book, and this is the first book that I've ever read where the main character was non-binary. So this was just fascinating to read about. The story broke my heart and warmed my heart all at the same time. I am a huge fan of this book, and it has so many amazing things in it because our main character goes through so much. It's also very fascinating to see the friends and the family of our main character who are trying to wrap their brains around someone who they thought was one thing their entire life and is now something different. And just seeing them struggle and also get better at using simple things like using their pronouns correctly, and seeing our main character kind of discovering who they are. It's beautiful. I highly recommend. The romance in this book is fabulous and I love it. And ooh, very good. Coming in at number 10 is Every Heart a Doorway by Shannon McGuire. This is the first in the Wayward Children's series, which has currently 5 books out, but the 6th one is coming out in the beginning of 2021. They're very short novellas that revolve around a world where there are doorways or pathways for people to kind of find a different world, such as the kids from Narnia, Alice from Alice in Wonderland, finding that doorway to a different world and feeling accepted and home in that different world. And this entire series takes place, and each book is different. Some books, like the first one, are set in this home called the Wayward Children Home, and it's all of them who have been through the door and have now come back to the real world for the rest of us, and they're trying to deal with the fact that they may or may not, they're looking for their doors, but they may never find them. And some of the other books revolve around actual worlds, but I love this author's writing style. I love that she can create these massive worlds and do it in such a small book where it doesn't feel rushed and it feels like everything's played out the way it's supposed to. I love her writing style. I think her world building is amazing, and this one is on this list instead of any of the other ones because it started off my love for this series and my love for this writer, and I want to read all of the things by this writer now. But I really loved this one so much. It is honestly such a great series, and if you like kind of fantasy books that are very atmospheric, this is your series. Coming in at number 9 is Moxie by Jennifer Matu. This is a book that I honestly didn't know what to expect from. It is the book that my best friend actually picked for me when I did my very first TBR basket, my TBR game, and she picked this book for me, and I absolutely fell in love with it. This follows our main character as she is in a high school that is very, very, very sexist, and there's a little kind of small act of rebellion because her mom is incredibly feminist and she feels like she's tired of having all the jokes thrown at her and living in a world where women are treated not so great. And it starts an entire movement. And I loved this book. It's written so well. I don't know, like, it made me so angry, but that was the point of the story. I just liked seeing our main character change throughout the series. I liked seeing our main character and her relationship change. I liked seeing our main character and her friendships change as they all kind of like grow together. It is so good, and I think it is also very realistic for someone who is in high school, because a lot of the things that our main character thought, a lot of things that she did, a lot of the situations that she was in, I was like, this was Kelsey in high school. Like, I relate to a lot of things that she was going through, and maybe not going through, but like a lot of things that she was thinking, and I just feel like it was very realistic for a high schooler, which sometimes is hard to find in YA books. But if you want a YA book about feminism that is amazing and does tackle some tough subjects beyond feminism, there is a trigger warning for sexual assault and talk of rape within this book, but it's so well done. And I know it came out a few years ago, and I think when it first came out, everyone was talking about it, but I'd never gotten around to it until this year. Yes, it came out in 2017, so I'm sure I got lots of hype in 2017, but I didn't read it until now, so I'm hyping it up now. It was great. Coming in at number 8 is Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel. This is the first book in the Themis Files series, which is a trilogy that he has created. But this is an adult sci-fi that revolves around these kind of robotic metal beings and a team that is trying to figure out what's going on with them. It's told in these interview-style formats, and the narration, I listened to the audiobook, the narration's amazing. This book is not what I expected it to be, but I loved every second of it. It flew by because they're not thick books, especially if they're all in this like style, interview style, then you're gonna fly through it. But it's such an interesting story. There was a huge cliffhanger at the end of this one, and I just was so interested in our characters. I was worried you weren't going to kind of like feel anything towards them because of the way that it was written, but you do. You get really close to these characters. You really get really close to the relationships that they have with each other. Oh, it is very, very good. I loved it. Cannot wait to continue the series because I need to know. I need to know. I need to know. Coming in at number 7 is actually a nonfiction book, and that is Love, Lucy by Lucille Ball, which is an autobiography that she wrote about her life that was not published until after she died. She wrote this autobiography with someone else, and then after she died, her children were kind of cleaning up her desk in her office, and they found this, verified everything in it, and decided to publish it. And I love the I Love Lucy show. Lucille Ball is a fascinating person to me. I grabbed this book for like 50 cents at a garage sale, not thinking much of it. Decided to read it this year. I believe I read it in February, and it was great. I think if you like books like The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo or anything that revolves around kind of classic Hollywood, you will enjoy this a lot. I got really connected to her. I got really invested in her story. The way she writes is very matter-of-fact, yet humorous at the same time. Not sure how you can get matter-of-fact and humorous at the same time, but she finds a way to do it. Her voice really comes through in this book, and I just loved getting to know her. I was fascinated by her. She was just fascinating. So this had to be on this list because I devoured this book. It was amazing. Coming in at number 6 is a book that I read quite recently, and that is George by Alex Gino. This is one that I read in November for the Leave-a-thon. It is a very young middle grade, maybe even a children's book about a kid in school who is discovering that they are transgender. And I loved the way it was written. I think this should be required reading for everyone in middle school. It is set in 4th grade, and George knows that she is a girl, but when everyone looks at her, they see a boy, and so it's just her and school as she's coming to terms with this, and this kind of happens alongside a school play that is going on. That is the play version of Charlotte's Web, and George really wants to be Charlotte, but because everyone sees George as a boy, she is not allowed to, and it's a glorious story. I read this in one sitting. I'm not even kidding you, within like an hour and a half probably. It is very simplistic writing because it is made for younger readers, but this feels very realistic for a younger person talking, so I felt that the writing was very realistic. I loved the story. I loved seeing the different people in George's family as they find out certain things about her and their reactions and how some of them were not what I expected. And I don't know, it was just very well written. There's a lot of good quotes within this book, and I want to read all the things that Alex Gino has now because I've never read anything by them before. And yeah, this was great, and I think everyone should read this. Oh, yes, 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 yes. So, number 5 is actually a tie, but they're part of the same series, so like I'm gonna count it as only like one book, and that is book 4 and 5 in the School for Good and Evil's series, Quests for Glory and a Crystal of Time. I love this series. You guys know this about me. These are some of my favorite books. I am a huge fan of this world, and 4 and 5 just we're so good. I think these two are my favorite in the series. This kind of starts off the second half of the series, which in my opinion is a little bit better than the first one. I enjoyed the villain a little bit more in the second half than the first half. It's kind of a mystery of figuring out who this villain is, and I loved seeing them trying to figure it out. It was great. Yeah, they're older, they're figuring things out about themselves, they're figuring things out about their relationships, and I loved watching them. I loved watching them grow throughout these books, and it's amazing. I don't know, these were so well done. I love this series. I couldn't choose between these two, so they're both in. Number 4 is Felix Ever After by Kelsey Calendar. I read this in September maybe? This is a book that was getting tons of hype this year. I believe it came out in the summer, and for good reason. This is so well done. I got connected to the characters in this book so well. I fell in love with the character of Felix. So this follows our main character, Felix, who is transgender, and he goes to an art school. And one day he walks in and he sees pictures of his old self before he transitioned and his dead name everywhere. And so he goes on this kind of revenge plot to figure out who did it. It is kind of part revenge plot, part blackmail story, and I loved all of it. We really get to see Felix figuring out who he is as a person. I loved watching that. I love watching him grow throughout this book. I was so surprised by the end. I see a lot of people talking about like a love triangle within this book, and I don't really see the love triangle. I see a very confused boy figuring things out. So this was so well done. I loved the writing. I think Kelsey Calendar is an amazing writer. This felt amazing. I loved the friend groups. It felt realistic. It felt, I don't even know how to explain it. It was so good. I loved reading it. I was obsessed with this book when I was reading it. All I wanted to do was sit down and read this. I didn't want to focus on anything else. It was one of those books that like totally took me heart and soul. And I loved every second of it. Alright, we're down to the last 3. Have you made your guesses yet? Coming in at number 3 is The Rival Queens by Nancy Goldstone. I read this in October, I want to say, and this is a nonfiction book that revolves around the characters of Catherine de' Medici, who was Queen of France at one point, and her youngest daughter, Marguerite, and their very strained relationship and kind of a rivalry that takes place between them. This was amazing. I love Nancy Goldstone's writing. I think she's an amazing biographer. She just has a very, very lovely way of writing where it's not dry like you would see most kind of like textbook biographies kind of are. This was fast-paced. I went through this book and took my sweet time because I loved every second of it. I loved reading about these two characters. I loved seeing her explain what was going on in the world at this time. Nothing about this book was boring. I was invested the entire way through. I was fascinated the entire way through. I loved her writing. She's got a lot of footnotes in here, but they're not boring. They're very, very informative. They kind of just, I don't know, she writes this in a way that's very easy to comprehend. And I think you have to care about these people and actually be interested in these individuals within history in order to actually care about this book, obviously. But if you do, then I highly, highly recommend this because it kind of reads like a novel because of the way that she's written it. It was so good. Coming in at number 2 is Who I Was With Her by Nita Kendall. This is a beautiful book that came out in September, maybe? Why do I always look at the publication page? It only tells you the year. So this one I actually had an ARC copy of and was, I think, 20% of the way through the ARC copy and realized how incredible the story was that I went out and pre-ordered it because I was falling in love with this writing. I was falling in love with our characters. It's amazing. This is a book all about grief and dealing with your grief. So it follows our main character, Corinne, whose girlfriend Maggie dies at the very, very beginning of the book. However, no one knows that the two of them were together, and no one even knows that Corinne is interested in girls. And so Corinne kind of has to deal with her grief on her own, and the only person that she really can talk to is Maggie's ex-girlfriend, Alyssa. And so the two of them kind of strike up a friendship, and then sometimes some feelings emerge. And this is so incredibly well written. I loved watching one character go through so many different stages within grief, grieving in so many different ways. This also kind of follows the character of Corinne as she is figuring out who she is and what she actually wants in life. So this is stunning. It also has a kind of dual timeline where some chapters you will have 18 days gone, which is 18 days after Maggie has died, so it's kind of like the present timeline. And then sometimes you'll flash back to the beginning, like this one says 6 months before. It kind of gives you the story in a very mixed-matched way, but I feel like that worked really well because someone who is going through grief like this is going to be thinking about random like things in history. So they'll think about moments with this girl and it'll be random. So like the timeline of the after is very chronological, but the backup to like the flashbacks is kind of all over the place. And you really see their relationship as it grows and just Corinne dealing with everything. So this was great. I highly, highly recommend this. Stunning, just a stunning book. And my favorite book of 2020 is The Missing Manuscript of Jane Austen by Sir James. Are we at all surprised? This book was so good. I read it in April. I sat in this chair and didn't want to do anything but read this book. I was so invested. This basically follows our main character, Samantha, who kind of gets a hint that there's an unpublished work by Jane Austen just hiding somewhere. So she goes to this house that she thinks has this book, and she and the homeowner kind of discover the manuscript and then read it. And so 80%, if not more, of this book is actually the physical missing manuscript of Jane Austen. And it's kind of like reading a new Jane Austen book that never existed, and I loved every second of it. It was so good. I think why I liked it so much was that this actually felt like a Jane Austen novel. Sir James kind of writes like Jane Austen anyway, and has taken a lot of inspiration from Jane Austen's writing, to the point of this book. The manuscript within this book felt like a Jane Austen novel. Now obviously there were some tweaks because some of the plot lines that Jane Austen would have been interested in are not interesting for the modern reader, so the stakes are a little amped up within this book than they would have been in like a Jane Austen novel. But I loved every second of it. I want to go back and reread it. I've tabbed the crap out of this book. Actually, both of these top 2 books I've tabbed a lot out of, which is saying something. This manuscript is kind of described as being one of her very, very early ones that never got published. So a lot of kind of character arcs like Mr. Collins, Mr. Darcy, there's even a couple characters from Mansfield Park that you can kind of see within these pages, and they are talked about as being like the early versions of those characters, and you can really see all of the inputs from Jane Austen's work in this book, and it's amazing. I am so excited to read more by this author because I think her writing is incredible. I think the storytelling within this book is incredible. I love the idea that there's a missing manuscript out there that Jane Austen has written that we have yet to discover. So I loved reading this. This was so much fun. My Jane Austen heart loved every second of it. So of course this had to be my top book of the year. So that's it. Those are the top 15 books that I read in 2020. Were you correct in thinking that this was going to be my number 1? Honestly, like, was going back and forth between these two. Couldn't decide which one was going to win until about 5 minutes before this video. But I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please let me know down below what some of your favorite books that you read this year were. I would love to know some of the books that you absolutely loved. But if you liked this video, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you want to be part of this awesome growing family. I've got all my social media down there if you want to follow along on any of those. And I will see you guys next year. Bye.